What if I told you the man who controls Israel's politics has secrets so powerful they've shaped the country's future? Benjamin Netanyahu isn't just a leader, he's a master manipulator. Behind every decision, there's a hidden story, one that no one dares to share. In this video, we're uncovering the untold truth of Netanyahu's rise to power, the tactics he used to dominate politics, and how it's all affected Israel. Stay with us to dive deeper. Watch till the end. Benjamin Netanyahu's journey into the heart of Israeli politics was not just the story of a man, but of a nation at a crossroads. Born into a family steeped in military tradition, Netanyahu was destined for greatness. But it wasn't just his legacy that pushed him forward. It was the deep belief that Israel needed a strong hand to guide it through turbulent times. In the early years, Israel was a nation fighting to define its place on the world stage. Netanyahu, with his sharp intellect and ambitious drive, knew the key to Israel's future lay in its strength, militarily, economically, and politically. From his service in the elite Sayeret Matkal unit, Israel's most respected military force, to his academic achievements at MIT, Netanyahu's credentials were undeniable. Yet, it wasn't just his qualifications that made him stand out. It was his unyielding ambition, a desire to carve his name into the history books, to be the leader Israel desperately needed. In 1996, the unthinkable happened. Netanyahu, a relatively unknown figure in Israeli politics, was elected as Israel's youngest ever prime minister at the age of 47. The moment was historic. But behind that victory lay a meticulously crafted strategy. A strategy driven by one clear, unwavering belief: Israel needed someone who could stand firm. Someone who could face down the world's toughest challenges without flinching. But as Netanyahu's political career skyrocketed, so did the complexities of his leadership. The Oslo Accords, which promised a path to peace between Israel and Palestine, were taking shape. And Netanyahu faced the daunting task of balancing security with diplomacy. His opponents criticized him for his hardline stance, accusing him of undermining peace efforts. Yet, Netanyahu saw the world differently. He believed that the true safety of Israel lay not in compromise, but in strength. Every decision, every speech, was a testament to his unshakable conviction that Israel's security came first, and he was willing to fight for it, no matter the cost. It was in the years that followed that Netanyahu's political genius truly came to light. He built an intricate network of supporters, both at home and abroad. With a keen understanding of the media, he cultivated an image of himself as the protector of Israel, a leader who would not back down in the face of international pressure. His connections with powerful figures across the globe, from the United States to Russia, gave him the leverage he needed to steer Israel's destiny on his terms. But it wasn't just Netanyahu's external influence that marked his rise. It was his ability to manipulate the inner workings of Israeli politics. He understood the game better than anyone. He knew how to exploit divisions, how to create alliances, and how to make his voice the loudest in the room. Through his careful maneuvering, Netanyahu ensured that no matter what happened, his political opponents were always a step behind. As Netanyahu's power grew, so did the sense of an inevitable showdown, one that would test the very core of Israeli society. His rise wasn't just about policy, it was about a vision for Israel's future, one where Netanyahu's influence would leave an indelible mark on history. And so, as he stood at the helm of the nation, there was one question that lingered in the air. Would Netanyahu's grip on power hold, or would the very tactics that got him to the top eventually be his downfall? As Benjamin Netanyahu took office in 1996, Israel stood at a critical juncture in its history. The echoes of conflict still lingered, and peace seemed as distant as ever. His rise to power, propelled by a desire to secure Israel's future, was not merely a personal victory. It was the culmination of a nation's collective hopes and fears. But what awaited him wasn't a clear path to success. It was a political minefield, where every decision, every alliance would either forge his legacy or unravel it. At the time Netanyahu assumed office, Israel was reeling from the Oslo Accords, a bold attempt at peace that had divided the nation. The Accords, which aimed to create a framework for peace with the Palestinians, were deeply controversial. Many saw them as a step toward progress, but to Netanyahu and his supporters, they represented a dangerous gamble with Israel's security. The scars of decades of war and terrorism were still fresh, and Netanyahu's stance was clear. He would not compromise Israel's safety for the sake of a flawed peace deal. This was the political landscape Netanyahu stepped into. A nation fractured between those yearning for peace and those clinging to the belief that only through strength could Israel survive. Netanyahu's challenge was to navigate this turbulent sea of conflicting ideologies, balancing his hardline policies with the promises of security and prosperity. The opposition was strong, led by figures like Shimon Peres, a man who had devoted his life to achieving peace. Peres had been a driving force behind the Oslo Accords, and his vision of Israel was one that sought harmony with its neighbors. The contrast between these two leaders could not have been starker. But Netanyahu, ever the strategist, understood the power of fear and uncertainty. In a nation still recovering from the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, who had been a champion of peace, Netanyahu knew that the road to power didn't lie in uniting the nation, but in galvanizing a segment of it. His political genius lay not just in opposing the Oslo Accords, but in tapping into the deep-seated anxieties of the Israeli people. He presented himself as the protector of Israel's security, the man who would never bend to outside pressures, the unwavering leader who would keep Israel safe at all costs. To do this, Netanyahu needed to win the hearts and minds of Israel's people, and he did so with masterful precision. He was a brilliant communicator, using the media to his advantage. He understood the power of rhetoric and how to use it to stoke emotions. His speeches were filled with urgency, portraying Israel as a nation on the brink of destruction, with enemies at every corner. This message resonated deeply with many Israelis, who, after years of conflict, were desperate for a leader who would stand strong against the world. At the same time, Netanyahu wasn't just playing on the emotions of the public. He was also quietly building a network of loyal allies within the government. He knew that power was not just about public opinion, but about forging critical alliances behind the scenes. Figures like Ariel Sharon, who would later become Israel's prime minister, played pivotal roles in strengthening Netanyahu's position. With Sharon's military credibility and Netanyahu's political acumen, they formed a formidable force that would steer Israel through some of its most turbulent years. As Netanyahu took control of the reins of government, the political landscape was set for a new kind of leadership, one defined not just by policy, but by the ability to manipulate emotions, create division, and keep his enemies guessing. It was a political strategy that would shape Israel's future for decades to come, leaving an indelible mark on both the country's leadership and its people. The question, however, remained: was this truly the best path for Israel? Would Netanyahu's hardline approach lead to long-term stability? Or would it sow the seeds of division and discord? As the story of his rise unfolded, the answers were far from clear. But one thing was certain: Israel's political future was no longer the same. As Benjamin Netanyahu solidified his position as Israel's leader, the stage was set for a masterful display of political manipulation. But what many did not see was the intricate web he wove behind the scenes, one that extended far beyond traditional politics. It wasn't just about military strength or hardline policies. It was about crafting a narrative, controlling the flow of information, and ensuring that no one could ever outmaneuver him. This was the next phase in Netanyahu's rise, securing power, not through just policy, but through a calculated dominance over the forces that shaped Israel's political landscape. His success didn't just lie in making bold decisions. It was in making those decisions appear inevitable, even unassailable. The first tool in Netanyahu's arsenal was the media. He understood something that many politicians overlook: control the message and you control the people. Early in his career, Netanyahu cultivated relationships with media moguls and journalists, ensuring that his voice, and only his voice, dominated the conversation. His media appearances were meticulously crafted, designed not just to inform, but to shape public perception. Every interview, every press conference was a performance. He was not merely delivering information, he was controlling the narrative. By framing himself as the protector of Israel's future, Netanyahu tapped into the primal fears of the people. He portrayed Israel as a small, vulnerable nation surrounded by enemies, feeding into the anxieties of everyday citizens. His speeches became an emotional call to arms, urging the public to trust only him with their future. In this, he was a master of emotional manipulation, using fear to consolidate power and ensure unwavering loyalty. What the public didn't see was how this image was meticulously crafted, not through truth, but through a series of carefully planned narratives. But his mastery wasn't limited to the media. Netanyahu knew that to truly control Israel, he had to control the very heart of its political system, his own party. His political rivals within Likud were not just opponents, they were threats. Through a series of calculated moves, Netanyahu ensured that no one could rise above him. He used his influence to strategically eliminate potential challengers, undermining their credibility and isolating them within the party. His power within Likud became undeniable as he manipulated internal party politics to ensure that any dissent was swiftly quashed. At the same time, Netanyahu's approach to his rivals outside of his party was no less ruthless. He knew that Israel's political system was a complex network of alliances and opposition, but Netanyahu was a strategist. He understood that weakness could be exploited and opportunities seized. He didn't just negotiate, he orchestrated, whether it was by sowing division among his political rivals or by leveraging Israel's security concerns. He made sure that no one could mount a successful challenge. His rivals, whether on the left or the right, became pawns in his game, forced to either align with him or face the consequences. Take, for example, the way Netanyahu handled the issue of the Oslo Accords. The very peace process that had divided the nation became a tool in Netanyahu's manipulation. While his opponents championed peace, Netanyahu took a hardline stance, positioning himself as the protector of Israel's sovereignty. By doing so, he turned the peace debate into a battle for survival, casting himself as the only leader capable of safeguarding Israel from the forces of destruction. His opponents, many of whom were deeply committed to peace, found themselves unable to gain traction in a country gripped by fear and uncertainty. Netanyahu, in turn, positioned himself as the unwavering force, tough, decisive, and never to be swayed. Through every decision, every policy, and every political move, Netanyahu's grip on power grew stronger. But it was never just about having power. It was about making that power appear natural, inevitable. He didn't just govern Israel, he shaped its very perception of him as its leader. And in doing so, he became a figure larger than life, one whose influence stretched far beyond the corridors of government and deep into the hearts and minds of every Israeli citizen. Netanyahu's rise was not simply a story of political strategy. It was the tale of a man who knew how to wield power in ways few could understand. His ability to manipulate emotions, control the media, and dominate his political rivals was a testament to his political genius. And it was all part of the larger narrative that he alone would lead Israel into its future. But as his grip on power grew, so did the questions. How long could this hold last? And would Netanyahu's manipulation ultimately secure Israel's future? Or was it all built on a foundation of shifting sands? As Benjamin Netanyahu's political dominance deepened, the public saw a man whose charisma and strength seemed unshakable. But behind the facade was a world of unseen machinations, subtle manipulations, and calculated alliances. The truth, however, was far more intricate, filled with untold stories that few dared to speak of. These stories, hidden from the public eye, reveal the extent of Netanyahu's ability to shape events, control narratives, and outmaneuver those who stood in his way. And in these untold stories, we begin to understand how far Netanyahu was willing to go to ensure his grip on power would never loosen. One of the most revealing, yet largely ignored elements of Netanyahu's ascent to power was his use of media manipulation. Long before social media was the weapon of choice for political figures. In the early years of his political career, Netanyahu recognized the power of the press and how it could be wielded as a tool to not only influence public opinion, but to alter the course of Israel's politics. He became intimately involved with media moguls and journalists, forging relationships that allowed him to control the narrative. But this wasn't simply about presenting an image. It was about crafting a perception so powerful that it would become the lens through which the Israeli people viewed their leader and their nation. An incident that remains largely unspoken in mainstream discourse involves the infamous 1996 elections, where Netanyahu faced off against Shimon Peres, a man deeply invested in the peace process. The public debate centered around the future of the Oslo Accords, and Netanyahu's position was firm. He would never trade Israel's security for peace at any cost. But what few knew at the time was the extent of his behind-the-scenes work to manipulate the public perception of the Accords. Using his ties to media outlets, Netanyahu's campaign painted the peace deal as a threat, using visceral imagery and emotionally charged rhetoric to stoke fear. Every speech, every campaign ad, was a carefully crafted piece of a larger puzzle. One designed to make peace appear not as an opportunity, but as a perilous gamble. The result: Netanyahu won the election by a narrow margin, and the Oslo Accords were effectively undermined. It was a victory, but one steeped in the manipulation of emotions and public perception. Behind the scenes, Netanyahu was also cultivating a network of loyalists within the political establishment, ensuring that no challenger would rise above him. In the Likud party, Netanyahu's rivals weren't just opponents, they were threats to his very survival. And so, he did what any shrewd leader would do. He began to systematically weaken them. One such story comes from an internal Likud meeting, where a high-ranking official, who was once a potential challenger to Netanyahu's leadership, found himself publicly humiliated by the prime minister. Netanyahu, in a move that was both subtle and ruthless, used his command of the room and his sharp wit to belittle his rival, making him look incompetent in front of the party. The message was clear. There was no place for anyone who might challenge Netanyahu's authority. But it wasn't just political rivals who found themselves in Netanyahu's crosshairs. Israel's military leadership was not immune either. In one lesser-known episode, Netanyahu's handling of the Israeli military during the 1996 Operation Grapes of Wrath exposed his willingness to use the military for political gain. The operation, which aimed to target Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, ended in tragedy, with the deaths of over 100 civilians in a UN compound. Netanyahu, as prime minister, faced intense international pressure and criticism. Yet, in the aftermath, he expertly deflected blame, casting the operation as a necessary act of self-defense and shifting the focus away from the mistakes made by the military. He expertly manipulated the narrative, portraying himself as the tough leader who would stop at nothing to protect Israel's interests, even if that meant downplaying the human cost. Further into his political career, as Netanyahu continued to consolidate power, he began to blur the lines between politics and personal gain. Stories have emerged from within his inner circle of how Netanyahu used his position to secure financial advantages for himself and his close allies. One of the most notable instances involved a series of controversial real estate deals, which many believed were facilitated by his political connections. Netanyahu, along with his family, was accused of securing land and assets in ways that seemed to defy the ordinary channels of governance. Yet, despite these accusations, Netanyahu's skillful handling of the media allowed him to remain largely untarnished. The allegations were swept aside, dismissed as political attacks by his enemies. But perhaps the most chilling of all Netanyahu's untold stories involves his manipulation of the nation's security concerns. As Israel faced constant threats from neighboring countries and militant groups, Netanyahu used the fear of attack to rally the nation behind him. His speeches, often fiery and intense, painted a picture of Israel standing alone against an unforgiving world. In private, however, Netanyahu was known to have exaggerated the extent of the threat in order to maintain control. Whether it was the Iranian nuclear program or the threat of Palestinian militancy, Netanyahu used Israel's security concerns as a tool to ensure the public remained loyal, forever on edge, never questioning the man who claimed to be their protector. These untold stories, woven together like a tapestry, reveal a leader whose political success was not merely a result of his vision, but of his ability to manipulate, control, and strategically shape the narrative around him. Netanyahu's rise was not just the result of a series of fortunate events. It was the result of a mind that understood power, emotion, and manipulation in ways few could even fathom. But as the stories of his behind-the-scenes actions continue to emerge, one thing becomes clear. Netanyahu's journey to the top was not just about politics. It was about creating a reality where he would forever remain the undisputed leader. As Benjamin Netanyahu's grip on power tightened, Israel found itself irrevocably altered, not just in the short term, but for generations to come. The untold stories of his rise were not confined to personal victories or political maneuvers. They had far-reaching consequences that reshaped Israel's political landscape, its relationship with the world, and its very identity. Each decision Netanyahu made was a building block, pushing Israel further into a future that, for many, was marked by division, uncertainty, and a sense of constant tension. In Israel, politics became a battle between extremes. Netanyahu's policies, often defined by a hardline approach to security, sent ripples through the nation, creating a political environment where moderation seemed out of reach. His unyielding stance on security, particularly his stance against the Palestinian Authority and the peace process, solidified his support among those who shared his view that peace was a dangerous illusion. But it also sowed deep divisions in Israeli society, where voices calling for peace were drowned out by the overwhelming narrative of self-preservation. The Oslo Accords, once seen as a potential path toward reconciliation, were now viewed through a lens of suspicion and mistrust, and Netanyahu's long-standing influence played a crucial role in this shift. Internationally, Netanyahu's reign left a distinct imprint. His hardline approach to diplomacy, particularly his stance toward Iran and the Palestinian conflict, reshaped Israel's relationships with other nations. Under Netanyahu, Israel's ties with the United States were often strong, but also strained at times, as Netanyahu's defiance of international pressure on issues like the settlements and Iran created friction, particularly with U.S. presidents who advocated for peace talks. Netanyahu's tenure created a pattern of balancing international relations with the hard, unyielding reality of Israel's security needs, often placing the nation at odds with the broader international community. Perhaps most critically, Netanyahu's manipulation of Israeli politics altered the internal dynamics of the nation's leadership. His ability to control his party, silence dissent, and maintain an iron grip on power left little room for new leadership to emerge. Israel's political system became increasingly polarized, with Netanyahu's allies rallying around him and opposition leaders struggling to find common ground. The result was a stagnation in Israeli politics, where policy innovation took a back seat to constant campaigning and political survival. In the end, Netanyahu's long reign was not merely a tale of personal power. It was the story of a nation forever changed. His legacy is one of deep political polarization, shifting alliances, and a country that, while secure, often found itself isolated, both at home and abroad. And as Israel continues to navigate the future, Netanyahu's impact remains ever present, carrying with it the weight of decisions that would define Israel's course for years to come. As Benjamin Netanyahu's influence over Israel deepened, the nation stood at a crossroads. its future hanging in the balance. His manipulation of power, his intricate web of control, and his ability to navigate the treacherous waters of Israeli politics changed the course of history. But as the years passed, the question became increasingly unavoidable. Did Netanyahu's reign truly secure Israel's future, or did it sow the seeds of its downfall? The story of Netanyahu is not one of a simple leader, but of a man whose vision and ambition altered the very fabric of Israel's political system. With each victory, each strategic move, and each untold story, Israel found itself bound to a path that seemed both inevitable and uncertain. His legacy will undoubtedly continue to influence the course of Israeli politics for decades to come. But the ultimate question remains: was it the right path for Israel? As you reflect on Netanyahu's rise, the impact of his decisions, and the untold truths behind his political career, one thing becomes clear: the future of Israel may still be shaped by the choices he made. Will Israel find a new way forward, or will it remain locked in the shadow of Netanyahu's power? If you found this story intriguing, and if you want to delve even deeper into the untold truths that could change the way we see the world, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to like the video and leave a comment. Let us know your thoughts on Netanyahu's legacy and Israel's future. And make sure to watch the entire video to uncover even more shocking revelations. The story doesn't end here. There's so much more to discover.